Every family has a rhythm, an unspoken contract of who gets to feel what. There's the one who stays calm, the one who keeps peace, the one who disappears into work. And then, often, there's one who can't stay quiet, the one who breaks the pattern, not out of choice, but out of pressure that had to go somewhere. That person becomes the black sheep, the rebel, the misfit. But what if that role isn't a failure of character? What if it's the family's nervous system trying to balance itself? Think of a family as one body. When the tension builds, it has to leave through the weakest link. The problem child becomes that release valve. Anger, shame, and grief flow through them so others can remain good. Their rebellion isn't random, it's regulation, a way the whole system keeps pretending to function. In this hidden economy, roles are currency. Someone becomes the caretaker, someone the hero, someone the invisible one. But the black sheep? They carry the emotional debt. They absorb the unspoken guilt, so the rest can maintain an image of harmony. Carl Jung called this projection, when a group disowns its darker impulses and places them onto one figure. In a family, it's not philosophy, it's survival. If the parents can label one child as the difficult one, they don't have to face their own unresolved pain. If siblings can look down on the rebel, they can feel safely good. The black sheep becomes the mirror for everything the family refuses to see. Their outbursts reflect the household's hidden storms. Their sensitivity exposes what's been numbed. Their distance shows what's missing in the center. But mirrors are lonely things. They reflect everyone, yet no one sees them. And this is the cruel twist. The scapegoat's isolation is both punishment and initiation. Punishment, because exclusion cuts deep into the nervous system. It registers as danger, as if the tribe itself has withdrawn oxygen. But initiation, because in that silence, something else begins to form. A self that's no longer made of family roles, but of direct experience. Neuroscience confirms what mythology already knew. Chronic exclusion floods the body with cortisol, dulls dopamine, and wires vigilance into the baseline. The black sheep's restlessness isn't just emotional, it's chemical. They're trying to self-regulate in a system that taught them love equals tension. Still, there's a paradox. What looks like rebellion is often the body's desperate attempt to find rhythm again. When you see the black sheep acting out, you're watching a nervous system trying to make sense of dissonance, to feel alive in an environment that numbs, and yet, within that pain, lies something sacred. The exile, in archetypal language, is the keeper of the tribe's denied truths. They carry what others cannot. Their suffering becomes a map of what the collective refuses to heal. This is why the story of the scapegoat is older than any single family. It's woven into myth. The exile who leaves the village so the village can stay pure. The wanderer who bears fire away from home so others can sleep in peace. But every exile eventually faces the same question. What happens when carrying the pain becomes your only identity? That's the question we'll live with here. Because rebellion feels powerful, but it can also become a cage. And midway through this video, we'll uncover the exact pattern that keeps the black sheep trapped, even long after they've left home. For now, just breathe into the recognition. If this role feels familiar, you're not imagining it. You were never born to be the problem. You were appointed to reveal one. Stay. The truth beneath the exile is deeper than rejection. It's regulation waiting to be remembered. Every family system runs on unspoken agreements, emotional contracts signed not with words, but with silence. One person becomes the absorber, another the achiever, another the one who never complains. But there's always one who carries the overflow, the one who holds the emotional debris so everyone else can keep appearing stable. That's the hidden contract. The black sheep unconsciously accepts the family's discarded feelings: rage, guilt, envy, fear. They live out what the others repress. When a parent says, "I don't know where he gets that temper," it often comes from the very place the parent buried their own. Carl Jung called this displacement of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge. Families are especially skilled at it. The collective guilt, disappointment, or desire that no one can bear gets exiled into one body, usually the one who's most sensitive. The scapegoat becomes a living projection screen for what the family cannot digest. This dynamic isn't purely psychological, it's biological. Neuroscience tells us that exclusion and criticism trigger a cascade of stress chemicals. Cortisol spikes, dopamine dips, oxytocin withholds. Over time, the body associates rebellion with survival. Acting out becomes the only way to feel seen, the only moment the system reacts. What looks like defiance is the body saying, "I exist." But here's the deeper tragedy. When rebellion becomes the only language of recognition, it turns into addiction. The nervous system starts chasing the spike that comes with conflict. Chaos feels like proof of life. Silence feels like erasure. So the black sheep keeps the family's energy circulating through crisis, unaware that every explosion is still part of the same contract they're trying to escape. Jungian analysis meets biology here. Projection creates pathology, and pathology sustains projection. The family labels the rebel as unstable. The rebel fulfills the prophecy through cortisol-driven behavior, and the loop continues. Both sides think they're separate, but they're dancing the same unconscious choreography. Myth tells this truth more poetically. Think of Prometheus, stealing fire from the gods, punished for giving humanity awareness. His defiance was both curse and gift. The black sheep carries a similar burden, bringing fire into a house built on denial. Every rebellion says, "Something here is false." But because the family can't face that fire, the one who holds it gets chained to the mountain. Over time, rebellion hardens into identity. The exile learns that different is safer than dependent. Anger becomes armor. Solitude becomes proof of strength. And in that armor, a dangerous illusion forms. If I keep fighting them, I stay free. But rebellion born in reaction isn't freedom. It's still a tether. The energy remains defined by what it resists. That's how the hidden contract stays alive even after physical distance. The family may no longer speak, but their emotional signatures live inside the exile's nervous system. The same hypervigilance, the same cycles of intensity and withdrawal. Psychologically, this marks the first threshold, the moment rebellion becomes identity, not liberation. Individuation, as Jung described it, requires differentiation without hostility. It's not about rejecting the family, but no longer needing their dysfunction to define you. Until that happens, the black sheep story keeps looping. Same pattern, new setting. Here's the quiet truth. Families don't create black sheep by accident. They need them. The rebel keeps the illusion of order intact. Without that designated misfit, everyone else might have to face their own shadow. The system would lose its scapegoat, and with it, its false peace. So the one who breaks the rules isn't just defying the family. They're holding the system together by carrying its tension. They're the body's fever, the symptom that reveals infection, not the cause of it. When you understand that, compassion begins to replace blame. You start to see that the black sheep's pain is systemic, not personal. And with that awareness, something inside loosens. The contract is still there, but now it's visible, weaving line forward. Rebellion has served its purpose. It showed the truth. But now it's time to ask what happens when rebellion itself becomes the cage. When the black sheep leaves the family table, the echoes of rejection don't leave with them. They live in the nervous system. Every dismissal, every silent disapproval, every whispered judgment becomes a hidden wound, encoded not just in memory, but in the body's chemistry. Repeated invalidation teaches the nervous system a language of hypervigilance. The slightest shift in tone, a glance, a pause, these cues trigger alertness. Over time, survival becomes the lens through which connection is experienced. The exile learns to anticipate conflict before it arises, to read the unspoken rules of a system that never offered clarity. Dopamine plays its part. In a household where love is conditional, attention becomes currency. The black sheep discovers that to be unforgettable is the only way to be noticed. Every outburst, every rebellion, every dramatic gesture is a spike in reward signaling, a fleeting proof of existence. The nervous system learns that chaos equals recognition. Safety is silence, and silence often feels like erasure. In this way, rebellion masquerades as freedom, but beneath it lies a subtle dependency. The body craves the very tension it once feared. The exile becomes addicted to the cycles of conflict, chasing the dopamine surge that comes from being both seen and feared. It is not willful defiance. It is physiology repeating trauma. Consider the man who shared his story on Reddit. He left a controlling, critical household expecting liberation. Instead, he found that every crisis outside that home felt like authenticity. He sought relationships that mirrored the intensity he had lived with. mistaking nervous system arousal for emotional truth. Every rebellion felt like freedom, but in reality, it was a pattern wired into him before he could name it. From a Jungian perspective, the exile is living out projections that never belonged to them. The family's shadow, the unacknowledged anger, fear, and desire, lives inside their nervous system. Every act of rebellion carries echoes of these projections. Rebellion is survival. Identity forms around this survival. And yet, freedom remains elusive. The paradox is that the same chemistry that enslaves the exile also holds the potential for awareness. The hypervigilance, the craving for recognition, the restless energy, they are signals, not verdicts. They indicate where the nervous system needs regulation. The patterns of rejection are invitations to see where survival has become identity. Pause and reflect. The body carries memory before the mind can interpret it. The nervous system remembers every exclusion. The chemistry of rejection is not a moral judgment. It is information. Every surge of adrenaline, every craving for attention, every loop of hyperreactivity is a message. The exile has survived, but survival has its cost. Later in this journey, we will encounter the moment when this loop begins to unravel. We will see how awareness can interrupt the chemistry, how individuation can rewire patterns born of exclusion, and how the black sheep can finally distinguish between rebellion that sustains a wound and choice that creates freedom. For now, simply notice the subtle rhythms in your body, the tensing of shoulders, the quickened heartbeat, the pull toward drama. These are not failures. They are the echoes of a system that once demanded you carry what others could not. Weaving line forward. If rebellion is chemistry and survival, how does the exile turn that energy into self-knowledge instead of perpetual conflict? Rebellion begins as a reaction. It is the body insisting on being felt, the nervous system refusing invisibility. But over time, reaction hardens into ritual, and ritual into identity. The black sheep can transform into something that looks like devotion. Devotion to opposition, to chaos, to being different, at any cost. This is where the outlaw turns into the martyr. The fight against the family becomes a defining story. Every decision, every relationship, every act of defiance reinforces the narrative. I am separate. I am resisting. I am alive, because they cannot contain me. Nietzsche whispered a warning. He who fights monsters should see to it that he himself does not become a monster. Rebellion without reflection risks this exact transformation. The exile mirrors the very shadows they oppose. In seeking freedom, they can become an echo of the control, the judgment, the rage that once dominated the household. Culture offers echoes of this transformation. Punk subcultures, underground movements, countercultural rituals. These are not merely stylistic choices. They are collective enactments of disowned emotion. Groups of people rehearsing what the family refused to feel, outwardly expressing inner tension in ways that feel authentic. Yet the pattern is familiar. The body, the nervous system, seeks validation through intensity, and the identity solidifies around opposition rather than presence. Defiance without individuation is still dependency. The energy that seemed liberating remains tied to the very system the exile wants to leave. Rebellion becomes religion because it answers a need the nervous system cannot yet satisfy: recognition, stimulation, and the illusion of control. Freedom remains illusory because it is defined by what it resists rather than what it chooses. And yet, within this tension lies the seed of insight. When the exile notices that rebellion itself has become a ritual, they glimpse the pattern. They see the invisible cords that tie action to history. They understand that identity is not freedom, but a mirror held up to the past. Pause. Reflect. If your defiance has ever felt like belonging or like authenticity, consider what it is truly feeding. Is it independence, or is it the body responding to unprocessed chemistry and projection? The story continues. Rebellion alone cannot free the nervous system. It can illuminate, it can provoke, it can declare existence, but to release the loop, something deeper is needed. Awareness, regulation, and the willingness to confront the patterns that feel familiar yet constraining. Weaving line forward. Rebellion may have been survival, and identity may have formed around resistance. But what happens when the exile recognizes the ritual for what it is? The next chapter explores the invisible ties that keep the black sheep tethered long after leaving home. Even after distance, even after the black sheep leaves the family home, the ties do not simply vanish. They linger as invisible threads, pulling at decisions, at relationships, at moments when solitude should feel like freedom, but instead feels hollow. This is the paradox of trauma bonding. The nervous system clings to patterns that once hurt it, because they feel familiar, even comforting. The exile may find themselves drawn to chaos, to situations that echo old humiliation, to dynamics that replicate the rejection once endured. It is not conscious desire, but a shadow mechanism, the body seeking what it once knew, replaying the scripts it cannot yet rewrite. Oxytocin, the same chemical that bonds us to love, paradoxically cements these patterns. Connection becomes inseparable from repetition. Love and pain become indistinguishable. In the clinic, therapists observe this constantly. Those who chase freedom often recreate rejection in subtle forms. Partners who mirror absent parents, colleagues who reproduce patterns of control, friendships that replay old dynamics. The repetition is neither failure nor weakness. It is the nervous system attempting regulation with the tools it has been given. Pause. Consider the sensation in the chest when recalling moments of longing for family approval, or the restless energy that surfaces when someone challenges your autonomy. That is the body remembering what it needs to process. Awareness alone begins the subtle work of disentanglement. Naming the pattern does not erase it, but it gives the exile a horizon, a place to anchor choice instead of reaction. The black sheep learns that leaving home does not automatically sever these bonds. Emotional addiction to chaos feels like home because it is home, to the nervous system, to the body, to the survival strategies it has honed. Recognition of this paradox is the first step toward self-authored freedom, seeing the ghost without letting it dictate behavior. A quiet exercise can accompany this awareness. Sit for a moment, noticing where your body tenses at memories of conflict or rejection. Breathe into those areas. Observe without needing to fix. The nervous system recognizes being seen without judgment, and slowly, the invisible threads begin to relax. Reflection. The exile's patterns are not signs of weakness. They are survival. But survival does not have to become the full story. The energy that once sustained trauma can eventually sustain presence, clarity, and discernment. Weaving line forward, the ghost of family shapes the exile long after departure. But awareness opens the threshold where rebellion transforms into choice. The next chapter reveals the turning point, where the black sheep steps out of the family's shadow without vengeance and begins to reclaim autonomy. There comes a moment when the black sheep begins to recognize the patterns that have bound them, the rebellions, the dramas, the endless loops of tension and reaction. They can finally be seen as what they are, not identity, not truth, but survival strategies. Awareness emerges as a subtle, steady force. It is neither anger nor triumph, but a quiet refusal to carry the family's projections any longer. Individuation, in Jungian terms, is this precise act, separating self from shadowed projections without creating new enclosures. The exile begins to distinguish between what belongs to them and what belongs to the system that raised them. The body and mind start to notice that impulses toward conflict are not commands. They are signals. They are information, not identity. Schopenhauer wrote of the tension between will and restraint. The exile experiences this daily. Impulses arise, demanding reactivity, as they have for decades. But restraint, conscious restraint, is not suppression. It is sovereignty. It is observing the nervous system's old rhythms, naming them, and choosing action from clarity rather than compulsion. Micro-practices support this transformation. Observing the body's impulses before they erupt allows neuroplasticity to form new pathways. A breath, a pause, a moment of naming the sensation. This is old tension, not my choice. Creates space. Over time, the exile begins to act from discernment rather than reaction. The fire that once consumed them now illuminates rather than destroys. In this turning point, rebellion transforms into purpose. The wounds that once isolated the exile now guide insight. The capacity to feel deeply, once a source of punishment, becomes a channel for connection, for creativity, for integrity. Freedom emerges not from fleeing, but from seeing, integrating, and choosing. Pause to reflect. The patterns that define survival do not vanish overnight, nor should they be feared. They become tools for awareness, compasses for action, and maps for the path ahead. The black sheep learns that refusing the role does not mean rejecting the family. It means refusing to allow their nervous system to be defined by another's denial. The shift is subtle, but profound. What once required chaos to exist now requires stillness. What once demanded rebellion now opens space for presence. What once carried projection now carries understanding. Sovereignty is not a destination. It is a practice, repeated in micro-choices, in observation, in the quiet acknowledgement of impulses without judgment. Weaving line forward. The exile who embraces this turning point moves toward reintegration, toward a life where rebellion is no longer a cage but a signal, a fire kept carefully, illuminating the path without burning bridges. The next chapter carries us there, the conclusion where the black sheep returns, not in exile, but in mastery of the very ember that once burned alone. The black sheep, once the ember burning alone, begins to carry fire differently. What was once isolation becomes illumination. What once scorched becomes a source of warmth that does not consume. The exile returns, not to the family as it was, but to themselves as they now are, regulated, discerning, and sovereign. Emotional insight emerges naturally. Rebellion transforms into discernment. Pain becomes a map, showing the paths once traveled that no longer need repeating. Each old pattern, once a source of suffering, now signals where awareness and integration have taken root. The nervous system, once perpetually in crisis, can breathe. Presence replaces reaction. This is a reclamation of sovereignty. The exile no longer carries the projections of others as identity. Boundaries are no longer defensive walls. They are channels for respect, for connection, for maintaining integrity without aggression. Compassion is possible because it is chosen, not imposed. Freedom is lived in the space between impulse and action. The fire, once threatening, becomes a guide. It illuminates choices, warms relationships, and sustains creativity. The exile's journey shows that suffering need not define destiny. Patterns can be recognized, regulated, and ultimately transformed. Pause. Reflect. The ember does not burn the hand that holds it. It reminds us that the body, mind, and spirit can integrate experiences that once fractured them. The exile's role shifts from mirror to firekeeper, from burdened outsider to conscious participant in life. If this story resonates, leave a line below. Your signal becomes a thread in a larger fabric of recognition, showing others that patterns can be seen, understood, and transformed. The black sheep no longer walks alone. They carry clarity into the spaces that once demanded confusion.